Parenting Podcast with Brooke Olson. This week, my special guests are Bradley Craig and Cecilia Powers. I am going to let you guys talk a little bit real quick about um, the introduction as to who you are and what you do. You guys will nail it much better than I will, and then we'll kind of step into the conversation, if you will. So, Cecilia, if you would introduce yourself a little bit.
Yes, I'm Cecilia Powers. I am a licensed clinical social worker supervisor in Texas. I'm licensed in Texas, Oklahoma, and Utah. I do a lot of court involved work. I work with Mr. Bradley Craig with Between Two Homes, and we do parenting coordination and parenting education, as well as I do custody evaluations, adoption evaluations, and supervised visits.
And Bradley?
So I'm an LMSW IPR here in Texas. I started my work in basically 1992 doing custody evaluations for family court services out in our neck of the woods. And I did that for about 6 years before I decided, I wanted to really start helping families instead of being the one who evaluated them. So we developed co-parenting education courses and hybrids of services all the way from mediation to what I call um, cooperative co-parenting sessions where they come and meet with me to design a shared parenting plan. And then most of our work is parenting facilitation. That's the predominant client that we're serving through what's called in Texas parenting facilitation, although nationally it's known as parenting coordination. Parenting facilitation in Texas, you can report back to the court. In parenting coordination in Texas, you can't report back to the court. So that's a lot of that work that we do. We do a team model of Ms. Powers and myself. So really when the court appoints a parenting facilitator that's appointed to us, then we have that team model. So they're getting a 2-for-1.
Nice. So, as we step into the conversation a little bit here today, obviously we're talking about parenting plans. We're talking about co-parenting situations and high conflict divorce and custody cases. And as parenting facilitators slash coordinators, there's a skill set that comes there that your clients come to you. They've got arguments about what they want and how they want to proceed with things like mental health, physical health, schooling, parenting schedules, all of these. And over the years, as I've done some of this myself and have been involved in the co-parenting conversation, when we're dealing with high conflict couples, if you will, this becomes really a hard process to get people into agreement or to be able to get decision-making processes done. And there are a number of different ways that the system goes through that in terms of, you can litigate it, you can mediate it, you can do the family law collaboration model and variations of that. But how do you find the direction and again, keeping the children at the forefront of this and determining what is the best thing for them in these conversations? How do you guys approach this in your team model?
So, first of all, the families that come see us have to be court appointed in Texas to be appointed to be a parenting facilitator. There has to be a court order. I mean, the parties can agree to it, but you still need an executed order that appoints and specifies the duties of the parenting facilitator. So we start by getting the court order. And once we get the court order and once we get the forms and fees from the clients, they're required to take our 6-hour online course. And we explain to them, we're $250 an hour together, that taking the course for $40 basically is saving them, that 6 hours of individual training that we would have spent with them. Our model is very education based. And so we want our clients to be as informed as possible, which is one of the advantages of the class, is that once they meet with us, we're talking about topics that they weren't aware of before. As we know, those of us who do co-parenting work, the number one complaint we get is we wish we'd taken this sooner. So for some of those families, just having those concepts of what is estrangement, what is the messenger child or secret agent, gets them prepared for our sessions. And then our first session, we do them jointly. So it would be much like this, only we would have at least one other individual on the screen because we're working with couples, where we both take on the role of educating. The first session is basically about 3 hours of education about parallel parenting, co-parenting, in the different forms of co-parenting. A lot of these families don't understand the label of cooperative co-parenting versus parallel co-parenting versus conflicted co-parenting. And most of the families that come to us start off as conflicted co-parents. And then we work through a process of future meetings where they design the topics that they want to address, and we address those topics with them.
And I was going to say, one of the other things, we allow our parents, we encourage our parents and empower them to decide what type of co-parenting they're wanting, whether that's going to be more cooperative co-parenting, parallel co-parenting, or a hybrid. Our number one goal is to get them out of the conflicted co-parenting so that they are able to best serve their children. One of the things that we tell them is that we want their kids to know at some point in time, say, you know what, when I was 9 years old, my parents fought like cats and dogs and I hated it. And then I don't know what happened, but when I was 10 and on, they were good. That's what we hope for our families that we work with. We don't ever want the kids to know that we're involved, but we do want the kids to be able to say, hey, something changed. My parents were able to present to me better. They were able to at least show up to my soccer games and my rugby games together. They didn't talk, but they sat near each other so I could see them in the stands. That's our ultimate goal for our families.
Yeah, and I think anytime a couple separate, there is acrimony in that conversation just by the setup. We are splitting, we're not getting along, we don't like each other in this moment. And I think that that's just a common piece that happens. And to your point, if we can get them down the line a little bit, sometimes that will change. And then sometimes it will not, because there is something else underlying that going on. What are so again, the notion here is that we want to get them into a co-parenting conversation. And I think most parents in the beginning will say, I want to co-parent. I think co-parenting is the best thing, but I don't think that they know how to parent. Or there is some other comment of, I put all this stuff out and I'm willing to co-parent, but they just will not agree. And in that statement, oftentimes it's that they won't agree to do it the way that they want them to do the co-parenting. And as you approach that, as you start to come into that conversation in your teamwork, how do you march them down a different hallway, if you will?
So I would say that our workbook between sessions is one of those ways that we're educating them about, cognitive distortions that they may be making. We do some exercise on how to communicate in writing. Most of the families that we work with, because they're high conflict, have our family wizard accounts. So we're able to monitor those and help train the family in their communication. So I would say that's one of our major tools, is the use of the workbook between sessions.
Sure.
And we assign the families a section of the workbook every week that they do independently. They submit it back to us and I review that. And when we watch our family wizard communications, we have a very specific way that we want them to communicate. We are talking brief, very, very brief, and solution focused, because the less words that you can have with your conflicted co-parent, the less words that you can have, the more communication that you'll end up having, because it's going to reduce the conflict that is inherently there, to change it from conflicted to parallel and or cooperative co-parenting.
So kind of back to Bill Eddy's BIFF format.
And
Sort of. We have actually a one-page handout. It's on our website, and it's just called rules. Well, there's rules for co-parenting, but there's also guidelines for written communications. And the orders that appoint us order the parents to follow those written guidelines. So I like it because they can just stick it up on their computer, and edit before they hit send in our Family Wizard. So yeah, it is that concept, like Bill Eddy's BIF program and information, but we just use the simple handout that narrows it down a bit. I think Bill Eddy's workbook is really great about helping them understand more. But even our clients who haven't read BIF, I think, are getting the information from us on how to facilitate that, especially by monitoring their communications.
So do you get a lot of blowback from people in terms of that communication style and wanting to expand on their how you're doing it wrong and what you should be doing differently and why are you communicating with me more and why aren't you getting more into the conversation with me in those? Because from my perspective, to your point, less is more. What is it that we want to deliver? And what is the answer to the question, if you will, or what is the solution to the problem in that? And I find that a lot of these communications are an attempt to keep one of the parents hooked into an ongoing narrative that they're trying to create.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find that's true too. That's why we do a lot of work in our Family Wizard. There are processes. Basically, you write your co-parent's first name, then you're going to have item number 1, and it's going to be typically no more than 2 sentences. If there's a completely separate topic, then that becomes item number 2. A lot of the communication that we work with, I mean, some of these parents really do just need basic guidance in communicating, but some of these families, you're right, they try and hook the other parent in. So that's actually one of the exercises that we have in the workbook, is how to disengage from that type of communication.
What are some of the things that you talk to them about in terms of that disengagement process? Because also I think what I find is, and a lot of the parents that I work with reiterate is that when I disengage from that, when I start to step back, things get louder, things get more intense. There's more stuff coming in my direction, and it doesn't seem to be helpful.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to let Cecilia answer that in a minute, but I'm just going to address one of the basic tenets of any behavior management. Behaviors tend to get worse before they get better, and so we'll share that a lot with our families. That you might be right that when you change your communication style, you'll actually see more blowback. But we're regulating both parents, so if that parent has blowback, then we can work with them on, you responded based on your emotions, obviously, as opposed to being child focused. So how can we work through some of that?
Yeah,
But I'll let Cecilia respond to the best. The main thing is you can expect that as you get better at co-parenting, whether it's parallel or cooperative, that there may be blowback from your co-parent for a while before they accept, oh, I can't control this person anymore. They're taking control of their own behaviors.
And as we're doing this, one of the things is, because we're not in a therapeutic role as parenting coordinators, we're not in a therapeutic role. So we're teaching them how to have a business-like relationship with their co-parent to really remove that emotionality. We'll refer people to their individual therapists, their court-connected individual therapists that can help them. But we really focus on that business-like communication. And when I say like removing words, I've told people, look at your message, see what you can remove out of there and have the content still be there. One of the things that we teach is to have proposals and to do interest-based negotiation. So if Johnny needs to take his soccer bag, and who is going to take the soccer bag to soccer practice, which parent is it going to be? Parent A says, I propose that I drop off Johnny's soccer bag at the soccer field and you can pick it up afterwards. Does that work for you? Or do you have another proposal? Very brief, very specific. And then that way it's more business like exchange. When parents are able to see the business aspect of it, when one parent doesn't have emotion, it oftentimes leads to the other parent not putting emotion into it. And if they do, because all this is being done in our family wizard, and if they do, if they start to say, oh, well, you never do what you say you're going to do, anything like that, then me or Brad will step in, send a message, and be like, oh, please rewrite your message and identify what you're doing that's incorrect that is causing, more problems here. But after one or two times of stepping in, usually parents are like, oh, I know what it is that I did. And I love it when I see parents, they're like, they send a message and they're like, hang on a second. They send another one. And they're like, I didn't mean to send that first one. I can't delete it, but this is already my rewrite.
By the way, in our training, she mentioned the message going out. So let's say Cecilia was proposing to me what she proposed. We train the co-parent to respond with either, yes, that will work for me, or can I ask for some clarification, or their proposal. And so their proposal might be different. So they're not shutting down the other person, which is the basis of interest-based negotiations. We're developing options. And so they're, typically when we first start working with them, I propose the following, and the co-parent's response is no. Well, that's not developing new options. So let's think about this. You can say yes and agree. You can ask some questions for clarification, or you can respond with your counter offer, or creating a new option is a better way of saying it, I think.
So when you find that there is a parent that you're working with in the couple that stonewalls or is not compliant with agreements or goes counter to the agreements that are proposed and are out there, how do you go about creating that correction? Because what I found in the work that I do, that not oftentimes, but more frequently than I'd like it to be, that there is one person that's there and doesn't want to be there, that doesn't want to cooperate, that doesn't want to move to even a parallel parenting mode. They prefer the conflicted parenting piece, and they're bound and determined to bypass. And I think this is the important piece, that they lose track of what this is doing to the child and to the long-term development of relationships between the two parents with the child, and they are bound and determined to keep that relationship with the other parent in poor form, if you will. How do you start to dig into that and help at least one parent make a shift so they can do that parallel parenting process and understand that it is a good enough model, if you will?
So I guess we start by having them court ordered to participate. And so I would say there's two consequences that are involved in our process if somebody is attempting to sabotage the co-parenting relationship or engage. One is the court order. We do report back to the court, and if it's an active case, then the family can be called to court. If one's not following those guidelines, the court may impose sanctions, limit time, the charge of the cost of the testimony, limited access to their child. I mean, there's lots of jail. There's we've worked with parents who've gone to jail because they're not working with the parenting facilitator. But I would say in general, it's cost. we're $250 an hour, which is not huge, but it's a cost to some of the families that we work with. And the harder we have to work with one parent, the more it costs. So I think one of the ways that parenting facilitation is helpful, that if there's consistent consequences for choosing to not follow the guidelines for communication, for choosing to engage, that are already built into the system for parenting facilitation.
So I was unaware until I met you guys that Texas had that piece where parent facilitation was a court mandate, but also a place where it is reportable and there are consequences to it. And this is one of the areas in so many of the jurisdictions around the country that is not the case. And that the consequences of not complying are kind of like, what are you going to do to me? I'm going to keep doing this, and I'm going to keep racking up money. I'm going to keep going back to court. And, I know I'm going to kind of tack here for a quick second into what we were talking about before we came in here, because you guys do work with the AFCC and these structures that do educate the jurists that are in this arena and the therapists that are in this arena to have different tools. Is there something in there that you see as a mechanism that is keeping some of these concepts? Because this notion that you're talking about here is one that I've promoted with judges here in California and other places too. Why don't you create consequences for these people that you put orders out to and they don't comply, and you just let them kind of roll over and do the next thing and keep this thing going? Because it's got an expense. It's got an expense to the state. It's got an expense to the county. It's got an expense to the poor parents that are involved in this.
Did you want to jump in on that, Cecilia?
Oh,
that was a little bit of a curveball, but I wanted to bring that piece forward.
And I'm glad to answer it too. I just want to give equal time to my buddy.
Go for it.
I think, I want to talk about a broader concept maybe, and I think this is answering it, which is therapeutic jurisprudence, which is the family law system often creates more conflict historically than solved conflict. And so, as you mentioned earlier, Brooke, they're going, the parents themselves are going through the stages of grief. And when you compare that to Bohannon's stages of divorce, and not all the families we work with are divorcing, by the way. I kind of hate that label divorce because it makes it sound like we're not working with other parents that are raising children between two homes.
Right.
But that therapeutic jurisprudence approach kind of says, how can we do this differently? And it does seem to be evolving as we're helping families understand more about empathy, but also as courts are starting to understand more about the consequences of that process, and attorneys. And so therapeutic jurisprudence is basically the concept, it was developed by Winnick, the concept that the law can be used as a tool to help families through transition, as opposed to a tool that creates conflict. And especially in family law, there's a lot of that conflict. The process may set it up. Here in Texas, and Cecilia will talk about this later, we use strength-based language in the work we do with families. Like, we don't use words like possession or visitation, but that's what they have in front of them, is a court order that talks about the possession schedule and uses words like visitation as if a child visits with a parent. And so there's organizations like the AFCC, and the AFCC is the Association of Family and Conciliatory Courts. It's an international organization of us that do this for a living and want to promote therapeutic jurisprudence. Most of the research in family law comes out of the publications from the AFCC, their journal. We're a lot of like-minded folks. So it's judges, attorneys, mental health professionals, and therapeutic jurisprudence kind of promotes that concept of how can the mental health system and educational system support families in court, and how can the judges use tools that will help those clients? As we know, parents who take co-parenting education classes tend to reduce litigation, sometimes resolve at least their co-parenting matters. So AFCC, we encourage anybody who's a professional to join AFCC. A website, I think it's afccnet.org. And there's a lot of research and a lot of movement that we're trying to make regarding how to change the system, because the system is like vastly different in California than it is here in Texas, as I understand it.
Yep.
And how do we make this process more beneficial to the family? So that's one of the things we do. That helps us is, we go to as many of the AFCC trainings as we can. We have a Texas chapter, and to just stay abreast of conflict disengagement and working with families that are in transition, especially high conflict cases.
I think the education piece for the judges and the therapists in this arena is incredibly important, because there are so many people that are in the system that really do not understand the dynamics that take place in high conflict co-parenting arenas, and they can do a lot of damage by not. And what I find, even, I mean, in a lot of the California jurisdictions here, we've got judges that turn over every 3 years. And I know that happens in a lot of other places as well. And about the time they get a sense of what's going on, they're gone and they're doing something else. They're in civil or another department. And that's problematic, because there isn't a front end conversation of if this, then that kind of a conversation. And what I've always promoted, and I know that, or I believe that you guys do as well, is let's get the parents educated as early as we can. So if they check 2 or 3 of these 20 boxes or so that are here that kind of indicate that we're going to go to high conflict bill, that they are pushed immediately toward a program like yours or mine that tells these parents, this is what is going on, this is the consequences for your behaviors, and here are some things that you can do to change the dynamic in terms of educating them for their nervous system, so how they can learn how to self-regulate, how they can learn how to be better parents, and not necessarily have to co-parent in the traditional co-parent piece, but to co-parent in a parallel area where they've got some level of self-direction, if you will, some autonomy in what they do.
One of the things that you had mentioned there is like when parents start to go to the high conflict, with good co-parenting education, the moment that they talk to their attorney and file anything at the court, if they take the co-parenting education classes, like Children in the Middle, Between Two Homes, any of that, if they take that at that moment, when they go talk to their attorney says, hey, you're going to file for divorce, or you're going to separate, you're going to get, in Texas, a SAPSR, the moment that happens, you're also going to take this course. That can reduce the conflict from day one.
Yes.
And then if it continues on, to be able to teach, when we talk about the conflicted co-parenting, which is what obviously we're trying to prevent, but then also understand the difference between the parallel co-parenting and the cooperative co-parenting, and then the hybrid, because it's next to impossible to have anyone that is fully 100% cooperative co-parents in every aspect.
Mm-hmm.
So there's always going to be a little bit of parallel or hybrid in there, but definitely get everyone out of the conflicted, if there's conflicted.
So what do you see as the vehicle to get the promotion of those types of programs into the broader systems? Because I had a friend of mine do some statistical extracts, if you will, of what happens in a given court if this continues with the people that are involved. Because by my best calculations over the years, I come up with somewhere around 27 to 30% of the people that go into custody, and let's just leave it at custody, whether it's divorce or paternity or whatever, um, cases, end up in the high conflict realm. And if that isn't approached at an early phase, it peaks out at a high number that just absolutely taps the resources of the court system to a point where they are just flat ineffective. They don't have the ability to hear all the cases, to get the people through, to do that. And to my point, I think programs like yours and mine that are out there that can help people get in front of this just aren't promoted enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think where you started was the question, what can we do? And, AFCC is a great thing. Joining, because when there is the movement towards empowerment and education and dealing with high conflict. And so I think all we can do is join organizations like that, and then we can continue to work together to educate. The studies on co-parenting education indicate that it reduces litigation. And I think for most programs, like my online program, one of the questions that we ask is, were you frustrated you were ordered to this class? Question often is yes. Are you now happy that you completed the course? The answer is yes. And then we do a rating of, when do you think courts should refer families? And most of our responses were either right away. Some of the responses were prior to litigation, but if you're in the court system, I guess there has to be ongoing litigation. So it's early in the process. And again, the number one complaint, and I think this is across the board for all quality co-parenting education programs, is the parents' number one complaint is, we wish we'd taken this sooner. And if we could get courts to understand that early intervention and early education can help empower them and at least give them some skill set. If you don't know what stages of grief are and you don't know what the stations of divorce are, you're doing crazy nutty things. I mean, that's what you do during the shock, denial, anger, the anger phase. That's where you go through these things that you're going to have to answer to in court later, but seemed like a good idea at the time. So I think education is paramount. And what we've seen is education leads to mediation results, which, if they can't resolve into mediation, then there's the interventions like our high conflict intervention tools, like mediation. Hybrid mediation, or like parenting coordination and parenting facilitation when the mediation just doesn't work.
And you had mentioned, like, how do we get the judges and the courts involved? The AFCC is great because that does mix the mental health professionals with the attorneys and judges. It's great that everyone can be there involved with the AFCC. And then I know in like our local areas, because we're both in rural Texas, I'll go and talk to the judges and educate them directly. I've done that on a number of times. I will give them information, allow them to ask any questions. So because of more rural area, we're kind of able to do that. But we've done trainings that judges have asked us to put on. So
yeah, and I've done a significant amount of that stuff here as well. And again, the frustration, at least in this arena, is people keep turning over and you can't stay in front of it. The next piece that I wanted to broach with this, because it's along the same lines, and I think the parents need to be educated of this going in, is their choice of attorneys, because there are attorneys out there that thrive and just really promote conflict, and they come out of the chute with DV allegations and all sorts of crazy stuff just to heighten this. And I think the parents, as they go through this, and this is something that I try to do, is to help them make better choices as to the attorneys that they're going to choose, both to defend against that stuff, but also to promote solutions in their process in a place where there's a laser focus, and that laser focus is the children, because I think you would agree with me that the custody conversation, if we're talking about just divorce for a moment, drives the divorce process. Nothing happens financially until that custody piece is typically settled, and that's where the fight is. Any comment on that?
So I was going to say, if we're able to help with the parents coming to terms with who's going to take Johnny's soccer bag to the practice, a lot of those things that we do see a lot in litigation, that can help reduce the conflict. One of the things that we can, in Texas, that we cannot do is make any recommendations about possession or access, parenting time. We're not allowed to. There's only custody evaluators in Texas are allowed to make any recommendations about the actual parenting time schedule. First, third, and fifth weekends, week on, week off, whatever that is. But everything else that we're able to do to help parents reduce that conflict, and because parents are coming to us court ordered, they don't want to, but maybe, and sometimes they do. Actually, we just had a family, they couldn't agree on anything, which is common. And they said, the one thing we do agree on is that we need you in our life. They're like, we need you without a doubt in our life, because you are making sure that both of us are staying in line. And it has already reduced their conflict significantly, because they know that they're being monitored on a basically daily basis.
And they have a judge who respects the role of the parenting facilitator, and so that's very helpful, because they know that there's consequences in place for them. Going back to, I think one of your questions was, how do we get this before the courts? And you were asking about, but what about the attorneys that are involved? I think, it'd be nice if we had a free resource out there for families that just says, hey, here from the beginning, here's what you need to know. The good news for us is a lot of people who've taken our co-parenting class weren't court ordered to take it. They did it voluntarily. And so then they learned about things like the Amicable Divorce Network, where you can basically have your case mediated before you even file. And co-parenting education, I think, helps promote some of that empowerment that sometimes these families need to their own process, but they're so angry they disempower themselves. So I think that having more education out there about what is mediation, there's pre-mediation, there's post-mediation, there's during the litigation, all the options out there of professionals who will sit down and specialize and design a co-parenting plan with them. We need to get that information better out there, but I don't, again, the AFCC proposes a lot of those changes, and it would be nice if we had a central website. So I think the most we can do on our websites, Brooke, is, have, again, as much handouts and information available to them as possible. And hopefully attorneys will start referring to those courses. The truth is, we wouldn't have the success that we do without the support of the courts and the attorneys who refer families to us and trust us.
Right.
You're right. There are some of those attorneys, just like there's mental health professionals who exploit families. There's attorneys that their view of winning is scorched earth, even if the child was burnt up in the process. But the vast majority of attorneys are cooperative, facilitative, at least we've found in our experience, especially by the time they get to us. Many times it's their legal assistant many times who's exhausted with the family, who's saying, look, appoint Brad and Cecilia to this case, because I can't take any more phone calls from my clients. But we need to get the information out there so people know that if you're bringing child issues to court, whether it's a divorce or modification, or whether they've never been married, but they need to have a parenting plan in place, we need to be able to educate them on the options. One of those options could be choosing the right attorney. Which attorney are you looking for? Are you looking for the one that's scorched earth? Are you looking for the one that's more likely to help create a peaceful and empowered solution for you. And by having links to other organizations like Amicable Divorce Network or Collaborative Law Institute, help parents understand more about the choices that they have.
Yeah, and do you find, and when you find that people are coming to you and they're just confused, that helping them figure out exactly what it is that they want, because they really don't have a notion of what that even looks like, to distill that down is a helpful process for them? I mean, they have, how many times have you had somebody come to you and say, well, I just want full physical and full legal custody, or full possession, um,
Mhm.
and decision making for this child? And how do you get them to understand that that may be a good idea, or that that's really not a good idea, and that ain't going to happen in any way, shape, or form, and to distill it down to, I understand that you're angry, I understand that there's something that happened here that breached your trust. What is it that you want to see at the end of the day, truly, and how do you want to approach it?
So we do a form of the magical question when we're talking to our parents in the first session. And it's, if you had a magic wand, what would your answer be? Would you want to be cooperative co-parents? And we explain that out. Would you want parallel? Would you want conflicted? If you have a magic wand, what would be the best thing for you and your kids? And regardless of the co-parent. And so putting that into the parents' minds from the get-go, they're able to kind of have that little bit of empowerment at that time and see that that's a possibility.
Mhm.
And then we build on that, but using the magical question, being able to identify, yes, this is where you are. We're starting, as Brad uses tabula rasa, we're starting with the blank slate. We're moving forward. We're not going to regress into the past. And if we have parents who are regressing to the past, that we see things, we encourage them to go talk to their therapist, who's going to be able to help them in that therapeutic role, and acknowledging that parents need therapists, that's separate from parenting coordination facilitation, that's separate even from the co-parenting education, that their therapists are there to help them with their attachment issues and their other things. That's not what our goal is.
Okay. But there's also a problem in that sometimes when therapists are working with their clients and they're trying to empower their clients with um, boundaries and whatnot, when they don't understand what's taking place or what the potential is for that in terms of narrative and what it looks like, optics, if you will, to a court, what that not understanding the court system or the family court system can do to create more problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of them don't understand joint managing conservative. Like you said, they come in, they say, I want custody. What does that mean to you? Well, I want sole. Okay, well, Texas is a presumed joint custody state. There's some things that have to happen, but the presumption is joint. But they don't understand most of that. And so I think education certainly helps them understand that process. Also, our co-parenting class, we interviewed several judges and attorneys for our class. And so while they're getting some contextual information and slides that are read out loud, there's also videos that are embedded. And some of those videos are the judges from Dallas and Tarrant County and some of the attorneys that practice there. And I think that's been really helpful to hear from the bench, basically. Here's what we care about. Here's what we don't care about. To hear judges talk about, alienating type of behaviors or resist refusal type of behaviors. We recognize them. We know what they are, and there's consequences. Hearing a judge say that, I think it is helpful for them. The judges tend to speak about cooperation and facilitation, but the ultimate goal, I think, is to get the parents to cooperate. So they get to hear, what are some of those issues and what court can look like. The very first video that they hear is, why does co-parenting education work? How is it beneficial? So that they get to hear from the judges who've ordered them to maybe a class like this. They're hearing from a group of other judges saying, this is why we refer. And one of the, I think, best compliments that we got in that video was one of the former judges in Tarrant County saying, you know, when I send them to their program, I don't see them again. So that tells me it's working.
Yeah, and they don't want to see him again.
They don't. Yeah, when the judge knows you on a first name basis, that's a sign that you're probably high conflict and maybe you need to seek some further intervention. I do think early intervention is good, though. I like the, you know, getting them early on to co-parenting education, getting them to mediation as soon as possible. There's this philosophy, and this is done here in Texas probably more so, but you know, they wait till the end to mediate, and it's what we call caucus style, where the parties are in separate rooms and the mediator goes back and forth. But you know, if they can be educated early on, they can understand that yes, we could do that model, or we could do transformative mediation. And in Texas, it tends to be okay. It's towards the end, the final is coming up. You have to try and mediate this, and it's going to be a one-day, one-shot thing. Parents need to understand that mediation can occur more than one time. You know, you can go to different mediators. Maybe that mediator wasn't the right fit. Cecilia and I work with families together at all times in the same room. Now, if we were doing a mediation, there may be a little caucusing where they take the parents into the room to say, hey, let's talk about this a little bit, and then bring it back. But this concept of you can only mediate one time is really problematic, because if we help families to go, okay, let's hold on to that thought and then come on back to our next session.
I was also going to say, one of the things that we can do to really help our families from day one is to use better language. And this is expansive. So from lawyers, from family members, from the TV shows, everything out there, to be able to have the better language. So it isn't the first thought when a parent's like, oh my gosh, you know, for whatever reason, our relationship isn't working out. What am I going to do with my kid? It's not the custody. It's not a custody battle, a custody fight. I have to have possession of my child. Before their relationship problems, they never thought about possession of a child. That word isn't in a parent's vocabulary until there's a relationship problem. So removing or changing some of those words from the get-go is going to can definitely reduce the high conflict nature of divorce, separation, at least regarding the children.
And that conversation flags attachment issues, right?
It can, or it can just be
that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's that possession, but that in Texas, the words are possession and access. Who is going to have possession of the child? Like,
I understand that that's the languaging, but that's often really the mindset, whether that's the languaging for Texas or California or wherever it is. But the mindset is this child needs to be with me. This is where they're the safest. I'm the best parent, and that whole conversation. And that's where things kind of start to really unravel. And it just leads me to one other piece that I want to touch on, because I know that we're going to run out of time here pretty quick. But when we run into high conflict, we also run into, and I'm going to just use the term, people with attachment issues, with attachment disorders, if you will. And that is oftentimes the brick wall that gets hit. And for many of the people with these types of issues, consequence is the only navigator for them to get out of that cycle. And short of that, through the system, because a lot of people look to the judicial system, the family law system, to fix the problem. And where there's not some level of consequence to the behavior is allowed to continue. And how do you, approach that with your clients, and how do you help them move through those types of pieces? And just to add to that, this is where I think the parallel parenting model really comes in, but it doesn't take care of all of the stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah, even when we're helping them make a decision on which form they, and we define, I think as Cecilia mentioned, it starts off with, if a genie popped out of a bottle, what would be best for your child? Not what do you think you can do, but if you could wave that magic wand, what do you think would be best? And that's where we start. And then we go, okay, 15 years from now, where do you see this relationship going? And a lot of times the parents will say, oh, 15 years of intervention, I think we get to cooperative co-parenting. Not all the families we do. Some of them are realistic and say, okay, no, I think the most we'll pull off is parallel or hybrid. But most of them, we have them work on goals. And so they're defining that goal. But we want it to be realistic. So sure, 15 years from now, we could be cooperative, but I don't think we're here today. Okay, well, what about 5 years from now? What about this year? And the reason we ask them that is so that we're working with them on kind of defining goals that they want. And a lot of the families will define the goal that they want us to work with them in a hybrid perspective, or the goal right now is the parallel co-parenting perspective, just to disengage, because a lot of that's what it's about. And parallel co-parenting is, how do we disengage, but how do we go ahead and still co-parent in the parallel format, which means we still need to communicate with each other. There's still some things that we need to establish about extracurricular activities, changes in schedule, fill in the blank, all those other options that they need to explore.
And just again, in that process, I think there's this funnel that brings us down to the very difficult, the most difficult people at the bottom of that are in refusal, that they have a black, white, right, wrong, dualistic look at their situation, and they're not willing to move off of that. Mm-hmm. And a judicial system that often doesn't know how to move them off of that because the consequences aren't there. This is the most difficult that I work with, and I'm sure it is for you as well. And where is it in your education system, in your programs and your approach, that you help that more competent parent navigate that?
So one of the things in our education, we do so much psychoeducation, whether it's in person on our virtual meetings, in the handbook, or the video online class. But through that psychoeducation, we talk about the cognitive distortions. Mm-hmm. And the black and white thinking is one of the cognitive distortions. Yep. We have them do exercises where they identify different scenarios, and that they also list out what some of their cognitive distortions. And when a parent is sending a message that has cognitive distortions or anything else, we'll have them identify that and say, this may be something that you need to talk to your therapist about to further work on that. When we send out any of those messages for parent A to rewrite, to identify their violations, parent B is also included in that. So you had asked how parent B would be able to learn to cope with a more difficult parent A. And I use parent A and parent B so though it's not mom and dad, because that oftentimes is not the case. But parent B is now able to see, oh, this is where parent A is struggling. Other people do see that and is getting education. And hopefully parent A is going to be able to hold on to some of that education, holding on to it, because it is talked about through OFW and in our sessions, what it is that they're learning, how they're able to apply that.
Do you ever find that there is a blowback to that process?
Oftentimes, no, because
yeah, from the court, the attorneys, or the clients. I'm not sure who.
From the clients, yeah. I think the blowback would be from the client, that feels that they're empowered from that conversation that you're having with them. You're calling somebody out, and now somebody's watching them getting called out. Is there a place where that person feels empowered that they start to put their teeth into that?
I mean, I think because again, the other parent, while you may be included, it's the other parent who's being charged for that communication and that boundary violation, and understanding that. So I would think it's less likely that there'd be that blowback. I can see the blowback initially from the client as we're working with them, and of course we're using strength-based language and empowering, and we're pleasant, I think, but direct in working with these clients. So I think that by both parents seeing those communications, it reduces the likelihood that the parent who might have engaged in this in future would not be engaging in that, because they've seen that there is a consequence, and that consequence is you get charged by your parenting facilitator to rewrite based on our training.
And rarely do we have, I mean, honestly, no one knows how to communicate, because if you take a high conflict family, there was conflict beforehand. They both present with their own problems. Regardless of everything else, they both have their own problems. Everyone has something to learn. And so there hasn't been a time that parent A got all of the violations, all the charges, all of the things, and parent B got nothing. That isn't a case. Now, maybe every so often that is, but usually what we see happen that we're aware of and we help them reduce is to not take the bait. So parent A says something, we're teaching parent B how to respond without taking the bait, without engaging in that destructive conversation, and instead refocusing them so that they're able to stay on track again. So there's a lot of education, a lot of kind of moving pieces through their communication.
I'm guessing that you guys have got a very full practice.
We do have a pretty full practice.
So we're kind of at that point where we've got to start to wind down. I'm going to open up so people can ask a few questions for you guys in the chat. But before I do that, I got a couple of real quick questions for you. One, do you guys work with parents outside of Texas?
So we are, because we're both licensed social workers, we can only practice in a state that we're licensed in. So I can only practice in Texas. However, we can get licenses in other states, and I haven't applied for those. But for example, Cecilia has a license in Oklahoma, so she can practice. I think the whole social work world, is looking at finding ways for some social work reciprocity between states, so that it doesn't make sense that we can't help families in other states. On the other hand, it does make sense that there should still be a regulatory board that you're answering to.
Yeah, no, I like the model that you guys work with in terms of working as a team in this process. You've got a lot of resource to bring to it. And the notion, again, we're in Texas and a very small handful of other states that do have consequences of reporting from a parent facilitator / coordinator can really be helpful. I think that is something that needs to be promoted much more.
Yeah.
Right. So if people want to reach out to you, again, can you tell them really quickly how they can find you?
Yeah, our website, our website, I say our because there's a couple websites out there for our services, but our main website is betweentwohomes.com. And then for our direct services, it's childreninthemiddle.com. So those are the services we'd be providing to clients in Texas, where the other website is more of our virtual services. And then Cecilia Powers, you have your own website.
Yes, I have another website that is for this area. It's Texoma Family and Court Services. We did put our email address in the chat for people to be able to reach out to us. I know someone had a question in Northern California wanting to know how to reach out to us for any questions. And so we did give our email.
Sweet. So if anybody's got any more questions for Cecilia and for Bradley, put them into the chat here real quick. We'll give you a couple of minutes to engage, and then we'll put a close to this. I want to thank both of you again for coming. This has been a robust conversation, and I do really appreciate everything that you guys are doing to help push this story forward, because it just needs so much help.
Well, thank you for having us. This is definitely something that's very close to us. We're both very invested in what it is that we're doing and wanting to make sure that we're able to help the families that we serve.
We also have a big mission of educating mental health professionals. So that's one of the things we do. We have a 6 to 8 hour, depending on the needs of the community, workshop called Intervention Between Two Homes. And that's where Cecilia and I do a training for mental health professionals to just understand the dynamics, because unfortunately, what a lot of these families need is good mental health intervention. But unfortunately, a lot of therapists won't work with court-connected cases because they don't want to be held not really accountable. It's just they don't want to be involved in that legal system. They want to just help the family move forward.
Yeah.
And that is something that we can do anywhere. That's not restricted to Texas. We can provide that education, be guest speakers at someone's training, go out and do a 6 to 8 hour training wherever.
I would be interested in talking to you guys about some of that facilitation at some point, gathering people together and doing some training for both mental health professionals, but also for attorneys. So if that's something that, is in the realm, that's someplace where we might be able to collaborate a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, of course.
Awesome. All right. So anybody have any questions here?
I just saw one pop up from Claire. Any tips for a high conflict co-parent who just doesn't respond? We're negotiation to change our parenting time, and he keeps saying he is going to send his proposal and he doesn't. I know court would solve it, but wondering if there is another idea you might have.
So you got a response to that?
So I think it depends in a way what area you're in. Like in Texas, the court can appoint a parenting facilitator. Other states, there is no language on parenting coordination or parent facilitation.
So Claire is in Canada.
Oh, so I know Canada has several programs for families in transition, but I couldn't tell you which counties out there order co-parenting education or require it. There was a great group of folks that got together in Canada. I think it was back in the 90s, and wrote For the Sake of Your Child. And it was basically the emphasis was on how do we transform family law, because everyone at this conference spoke about, what's needed is to change the terminology and focus on parenting time and the damage done by this current litigation process. Now, after having presented in Canada and having a lot of colleagues in the AFCC from Canada, just because they published that's how it needs to be changed doesn't mean that's what actually occurred in Canada. So I'm curious where they are now. So I don't know if you have a parenting facilitator in that neck of the woods or parenting coordinator, that may be a really, really good resource, or somebody that specializes if your co-parent can agree to participate in that.
And she did say that they have, I believe, a parenting coordinator. We had one for 2 years, but neither of us have the money. He doesn't pay child support nor his court costs. He owes me. We have JP Boyd. He's one of the best in Canada. So we don't know any of the legalities there, but I also thought of just communicating through our family wizard. That's tracks everything. It can reduce litigation using any of the co-parenting education things that are within your control.
Yeah, one of the other things that I think can help along the way as well here, in terms of communication, is learning how to, one, do it yourself, but in the interim, having somebody in the background that can help you screen it, distill it, and deliver it in a different way as well, to help downregulate the conflict. Yeah, there are people out there that actually do that for you and can help. I know that OFW has that algorithm in the background that works, but it needs to often be taken to a different level. Yeah. Communication is everything and how you do it. And I think long term is the answer to your narrative. I think whether it's in court or in mediation or whatever, and it really spells out who you are and what your intentions are going forward. And I think that often at the end of the day is the answer if you have to go through the system.
Mm-hmm. But if you're wanting to avoid the system, anything you can do to encourage, I know your co-parent isn't responding, but anything you can do to facilitate let's get the schedule for mediation, or how about we define some expectations of dates, and maybe there's, in Texas, there's some free mediation clinics and other things available for families, but I don't know about in Canada.
Yeah. Canada is similar. I work I've worked with people in Canada, Australia, England, here. I've even got one in Hong Kong that I work with, and the systems are very similar, and the problems are very similar in how they express, and the answers oftentimes are pretty common. So, and again, to your point, Bradley, the system's not the answer. It's trying to extract yourself from the hook of the conflict and the ongoing stuff, and problem solving on your own side, and having somebody that can help you problem solve.
Mm-hmm. In most cases, I'm glad that we have family courts in place, because there are people who batter other individuals. There are children who need to be protected from abuse. Unfortunately, what happens in the family law system is the courts are flooded with issues that can be resolved through other means, and they don't have the time for those cases that really require some protection for the child or co-parent or whatever's needed. So we tend to have some of these hearings that are, okay, each side has 1 hour, which the complexity of a family law case, until it goes to final trial, is often a bigger issue than an hour of what you can present.
Yeah. All right. Let's go ahead and close this. It doesn't look like there's any new questions up here. Again, Cecilia, Brad, thanks for coming in. Thanks for everybody that's listening. And
yes, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Brooke. Appreciate it.
Take care, everybody. And for you two, if you would just hang on here for a minute, because it takes a minute for this to all upload. And if you jump out, it creates a little bit of a problem. So thank you, everybody, again, for coming in. This has been another episode of the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast. Take care.